So, Dr. Alex, thank you so much for coming. For the people who don't know who you are and what you do here at the university, could you give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Alexander Thomas. I am the course leader of the current BA in Media Production here at UEL, and I also teach on the filmmaking degree, both the MA and the BA. So I'm mainly a filmmaker, and so my background is in filmmaking, and that's what I teach here at University of East London. But as I'm sure we'll talk about a lot today, I also did a PhD here at UEL and have recently written a book on transhumanism.
Interesting. So it's an unusual combination.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you teach film.
Yep.
And you wrote a book on transhumanism.
Absolutely, yeah.
What made you write that book?
Well, the truth is, I'd got while I was making films, I started to do a bit of hourly paid lecturing work here at the university, teaching English and academic skills originally. Yeah. And eventually that led to a lectureship in what was the Language Centre, which has since closed. And when I got that lectureship, the university turned around to me and said, right, you need to do a PhD now because you're a lecturer. And I was thinking, oh, okay, I want to make films. I'm not sure I want to do a PhD. But and in the Language Centre, the other two academics both had PhDs in linguistics, which I had no interest in doing. But luckily, my boss was very kind and said, you can do it in whatever you want. And I'd recently been to an exhibition at the Wellcome Museum up near King's Cross, and it was called Superhuman. And it was all about the kind of history of enhancement technologies, most of which were about making us normal again, you know, so it was about walking sticks and glasses and things like that. But towards the end, it kind of goes on where are these enhancement technologies going? And there was a transhumanist actually who was it was just a video of him talking, and you'd put the headphones on and listen. And it was a guy called Julian Savulescu. And the stuff he was talking about, I came out of that exhibition thinking, how is this not all anybody's talking about? This is completely crazy. Right. And so, yeah, when I was told you've got to do a PhD, I thought there's nothing I would rather do it in than thinking about, you know, the future of humanity and our relationship with technology. So that's what I did. And I did the PhD here at UEL. And as I say that, then I turned that PhD into a book which came out in 2024 with Bristol University Press.
Amazing. Okay, so I guess we're going to dive straight in. Let's get to the nitty-gritty of things. This is quite personal because I take interest in these things, quite a lot of interest. So for those people who are new to the concept, how would you define in simple layman terms what transhumanism is?
Yeah, okay, so I would say transhumanism is basically the idea of radically upgrading the human condition using applied technoscience. So you could think of it as self-directed human evolution. So humans taking evolution into our own hands, effectively, designing ourselves. And some of the aims of transhumanists include things like trying to increase human lifespan and health span, so trying to live much, much longer, not just the 80 years most of us can expect, maybe hundreds or even thousands of years. Some transhumanists even suggest living forever. So that's one aim. Another is to massively increase our intellectual capabilities. Why accept human, you know, if I said to you what's 273 divided by 7 multiplied by 148, you probably wouldn't know the answer, but a computer could do it very quickly. So why should we accept the fact that we can't do that? So they also think, you know, maybe we can use, for example, AI, fuse with AI, and therefore eventually increase our cognitive capacities as well. So that's kind of super intelligence, if you like. And then another aspect of it would be around our physical capabilities. So, you know, bats can echolocate, a cheetah can run much quicker than us, a bear is much stronger than us. Why shouldn't we have those powers and skills and so on? So how could we increase what we physically can do and potentially also change the way it feels to be human? Why accept the fact that most of us are, you know, maybe a little bit glum sometimes? Why can't we just upgrade the thermostat and what it feels to be human so we could radiate pure joy or something like that? So you could conceptualize that as the three supers: super longevity, super intelligence, and super well-being. So that's one way of kind of conceptualizing transhumanist aims and ideas.
So those all seem quite positive for
now.
Yeah,
they do. Yeah.
So I guess my next question is, what are some of the most realistic human enhancements or transhumanism enhancements? Can't speak today. Might we see in the next sort of 10 to 20 years? Where do you see this going?
Well, I'd say the first thing is I would not want to predict. I'll explain why, but basically I think it's very, very difficult to predict the future because there are simply too many factors at play. However, transhumanists have some quite specific things many of them think we're going to achieve soon. So a couple of examples of those are something called longevity escape velocity. And exactly, longevity escape velocity. There's a kind of famous biologist called Aubrey de Grey. And did you know that there's some animals out there that don't age? They don't get older. So sturgeon, rough-eye rockfish, aspen trees.
I have no idea what those are.
So yeah, some turtles and tortoises too. They literally don't get more likely to die the older they get. They will eventually usually die because they'll get eaten or some kind of accident. But they don't get biologically older. They continue to be fertile. And there's some animals that like that. Aspen trees are also biologically immortal. So there's these kind of things exist in the world, and Aubrey de Grey thinks, well, we can start to learn from those species, for example, and by 2035 he thinks we'll reach a point where every year you age, the technologies will be able to halt your aging by a year. So effectively, you will stop aging by 2035, according to Aubrey de Grey.
That's in
10 years. And then, of course, after a number of years of that, we'll actually have the technology then to start reversing aging. So the idea of longevity escape velocity is if you can survive in good nick up until 2035, then effectively you might be able to join the transhumanist gang and live forever.
Isn't there a guy who's a biohacker at the moment?
Brian Johnson, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that not what he's trying to do? He's I
can't remember the little phrase he uses, but it's basically live forever, don't die, maybe it is something like that. But but yeah, so that's a big part of the transhumanist creed. Many of them focus on the idea of immortality. Some kind of go, no, immortality is a bad idea because you might get bored, so we should have amortality. We should die when we choose to die instead of, there's a kind of schism, by the way, in transhumanist ideas there between those that want us to remain biological, fleshy beings, and so Aubrey de Grey would be an example of one of those. And those that think, well, actually, if you look at the evolution of digital technologies, that's going much faster than biological evolution. Mm-hmm. So our best chance of creating this, immortal future or whatever, it would be to hitch a ride on that evolutionary trail. So in that case, they say, well, we should fuse with AI, which is going to radically outstrip our capacities, and then you get concepts such as brain uploading. So that's like taking the human brain, or my mind, turning it into digital format, and then allowing that to be uploaded to, anything. So you could take on any physical manifestation with your personality, your experience, a feeling that it is you, connected to it. So there is that this kind of divergence within transhumanism, those who focus on the digital evolution of humanity and the fusion between computers and humans, effectively, and the biological. And related to that, so that's another thing that transhumanists actually think will happen in the next few years, some of them think within 2 or 3 years. Ray Kurzweil is the most famous proponent of this idea, the concept of the singularity. So sometimes it's referred to as the intelligence explosion, but this is when AI becomes so powerful that it reaches human-level capacities at all things, including designing itself. And therefore, when it gets to that level, it very quickly recursively engineers its own intelligence, and it basically just creates an intelligence explosion where the kind of potential of intelligence is unlocked, and AI suddenly just becomes incredibly potent. They use the term the singularity because that is a term that comes from cosmology, which is the other, like an event horizon is a singularity. So the laws of physics break down on the other side. So this is the same idea that when this intelligence gets brought into the universe, it's impossible for humans to know what would happen on the other side. That our laws of our understanding of the world would effectively break down. And so some transhumanists think, well, we need to fuse with AI because this intelligence explosion is going to happen. So we want to be part of that rather than kind of taken over or destroyed by this process. So some transhumanists think that will happen by 2029. Some think AGI is just 2 years away. Ray Kurzweil, I think, says 2029, but thinks we'll fuse with technology by 2045 or something like that. So again, these are things that they think are going to happen in the near future. Now, personally, I'm very skeptical of both those ideas, longevity, escape velocity, and the singularity. I don't think they're as close as these guys think. I think much more likely is we're going to see an increase in surveillance technologies as part of this, and therefore enabling authoritarian structures and potentially increasing the capacity for the marginalization of vulnerable people. And I think that is more likely to be an outcome of the kind of technologies that we're seeing emerging, unfortunately.
Which leads me to the next question about ethical concerns. I mean, you've just mentioned a million things that could happen and that are potentially going to happen. So how do you think this is going to affect society and equality? And could we be creating like a new elite class, in a sense, with this?
I think, worryingly, we're already seeing strains of this. There's already an incredible concentration of wealth that's happened recently. Yeah. The technology sector has become the most hegemonic or powerful sector in the economic side of society as well. We're starting to see concepts such as surveillance capitalism. That's Shoshana Zuboff's notion. Nick Couldry and Ulysses Mejias talk about data colonialism. And Yanis Varoufakis says, well, capitalism is now over. We now live in techno-feudalism. Such is the power of these techno-elites to kind of take our data, potentially control us and manipulate us.
So data colonialism.
Colonialism, yeah.
What is that?
So it's basically the idea that the way that data is being expropriated from humans as a kind of exploitative practice of taking information about us and then using it potentially on us is similarly to colonialist practices of the past. So it's a kind of similar conceptualization of the right to objectify humans and use them for your own purposes, in many ways. So it's a kind of exploitative regime, and that's the kind of, surveillance capitalism is this notion that capitalism is currently buoyed by the practice of surveillance and data being the most valuable asset in society. So whereas before we might, see colonial practices which involve the exploitation of minerals or coal or whatever energy sources, as well as the people from those areas, we're now seeing similar practices enacted with regards to data. So that's where the idea of data colonialism comes in. Techno-feudalism, of course, is pointing out that these techno-elites are now so powerful that effectively this isn't a capitalist relationship anymore. It's almost like a feudal relationship. So that's Yanis Varoufakis' conception of it. And the point is we should definitely be worried about these things. They're already happening. But also, if you take transhumanism as an idea, say healthcare, for example, the NHS is this idea that we should all have free access to health, and it's that's based on the idea that health has a kind of normal level, which is what we'd call healthy, but these technologies would kind of break that concept of healthiness because health becomes effectively plastic infinite. So then who decides what is the level that everybody should have access? So that creates a problem. And then in capitalist structures as well, it means if you can afford the technology, you're better placed to then become more rich and powerful, which puts you in a better position to then become more competitive in the capitalist market, which means you get more wealth and power, and those who don't become less. So effectively you get this kind of divergence. You could end up in a position where inequality could mean a permanent end to kind of social mobility. There's a concept that Harari uses called the gods and the useless. The idea that there could just be a few people that have access to these tools and technologies that basically rule like gods, have a kind of, and everybody else is automated. The jobs are automated. They don't have a role in society, and they become the kind of the marginalized, the useless.
And that's Yuval Harari.
Yuval Noah Harari says that, yeah. So, I think, of course, some of these ideas are potentially a bit fanciful in some ways, but there's some things we need to think about here. Expulsions and concentrations are very much part of modern day capitalism. The way we see the treatment of marginalized people now, increasingly so, and a lot of the rhetoric used towards marginalized groups. That has serious implications for maybe a majority in the future, especially if automation and unemployment kind of really kicks in with the rise of AI, which is a possibility.
So far, not so good. Okay, so then if technology allows us to drastically enhance our bodies and our minds, would you say we're potentially at risk of losing a sense of what it means to be human?
So I think my response to that would basically be, well, what do we mean by being human in the first place? Because I think our conception of what it means to be human is actually a kind of social construction. It's kind of a myth to start with. So, in the West, it's kind of like this idea that humanity is something that designates us as separate and above the rest of nature because our rationality is so superior that we're somehow different and above everything else. Whereas I think that's a very dubious conception of what it means to be human to start with. So for me, what makes us human is socially contestable. And I don't think, therefore, protecting some idea of the human is the right way to think about this. It is one of the critiques of transhumanism. It's called bioconservatism, usually. But I don't think that's the most useful way to go, because we've always evolved alongside our technologies, and we will always continue to do so. I mean, if you think about like phones, for example, they addict us, they feed us misinformation, they polarize us, they affect our mental health. And yet we're still human, right? We don't think just because I've got a phone, I'm no longer human. So the impacts of the technologies can really be extremely negative without any kind of, threat to our humanity in any sense. So I think we need to think of the threats of these things in terms of ethics, politics, the environmental implications of the changes, the threat of kind of pursuing ever greater means without sufficiently thinking through what ends we're trying to achieve. And those are the kind of questions we want to be asking rather than kind of trying to defend our humanity, which I think is maybe a bit of a spurious notion to start with.
Do you think that artificial intelligence will someday reach a level of having consciousness? Because this is one of the things that psychologists sort of grapple with, and because there's no answer to it. Nobody knows what consciousness is.
Exactly,
they haven't been able to answer it forever.
Yeah.
So do you think that artificial intelligence might one day become conscious?
I strongly suspect it will not. I don't know what consciousness is, just like science doesn't know what consciousness is. We have no answer to that question. It's a big gaping hole in our understanding, again, of what it means to be human, what life is, everything else. There are theories that everything is conscious. Maybe this desk has consciousness, could be a kind of natural element of being. But then it brings questions up about kind of the binding of that consciousness. Why do I feel like me and I can't get inside your head? Does this desk feel like a single entity? So there's all sorts of questions like that emerge out of those kind of theories. But instinctively, I would say, it seems to me that animals and humans have this thing called consciousness, which emerges from the complex unfolding of life emerging. Right. And there's no evidence that computers or silicon, that consciousness exists in those things. And I don't think it will just magically appear. So I personally don't believe in the idea that AI will ever be conscious. I think it will be extremely good at making us think it's conscious, but that's because both the inputs that go into AI are all human. So they're our human language, which makes us feel like it's intelligent when actually we're putting all of it in. And at the other end, when it spits its stuff out after the maths in between, we're doing the interpreting of that maths, which is then put back into language that we understand. So it feels like, oh wow, this is really intelligent, but in between it's just maths that's happening. So there's no consciousness there at all. And I think it will become increasingly good at replicating human consciousness, and it will trick a lot of people into thinking it's conscious. And I also think there's a real danger that the owners of these machines will see a benefit in making us think it's conscious, because then it's more valuable and so on. But I personally don't buy the idea that AI will ever be conscious. No, I think consciousness is a biological kind of part of life.
How do you think that these enhancements might affect our mental health, like our sense of identity?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would say it depends on the context in which they're emerging. So for me, in a capitalist context, the technologies that will be developed are likely to be directed at our individual choices, but in doing so, they're likely to atomize us, separate us, and have negative impacts, I think. I think it's always worth bearing in mind that other worlds are possible. We could have different systems that have a different kind of attitude to what technologies might be for, have a different conceptualization of what it means to be human, what it should mean to be human. And I think we could co-evolve with technologies in very different ways than we're doing. So I would like us to kind of develop technologies in more inclusive, pluralistic ways, more ecologically aware ways. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening under capitalism. So unfortunately, I think it's our context rather than the technologies itself that means that it's likely to have a damaging impact on our mental health and well-being.
So do you think there should be ethical red lines that we shouldn't cross? And then who decides where those lines are and who shouldn't cross them?
So for me, that last question is the really important one there.
Yeah.
So I would say no for red lines, because who gets to decide these red lines? What are these red lines, right? So I think
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, exactly. At the moment, who's doing it is the tech billionaires. That's who chooses what these red lines are. But it's not even just the red lines. It's choosing the direction of travel. It's choosing what our future should be, And I think it's really useful to understand what does Elon Musk think our future is, and we can actually, we can tell that story. And for me, it's pretty bleak. So their decision, obviously, of what this technology should do involves, unsurprisingly, extending their power and wealth, right? So this is why we see an increase in surveillance. This is why they, the call for data. It comes from an urge to control. That's where that instinct comes from. So for me, it's not a question about drawing red lines, because I think the complex unfolding of life means that we always have to be open to change and so on. But we want to be able to be democratically responsive to the unfolding and as cognizant as possible of it, so we have greater agency, or maybe having agency is the wrong way to put it, but we get to enact agency in a way that we're at least aware of what's going on, I think. So I think we need to rethink the systems and the logics and the ideas that underpin the unfolding of our relations with technology. And it's about creating more democratic, pluralistic, inclusive politics, and absolutely rejecting the visions of those billionaires. So for me, the big question is who is getting to decide what is this future, rather than drawing red lines, which I think is always going to be problematic.
Would you say that it's fair to think that transhumanism or AI, artificial intelligence, isn't actually a bad thing for humanity, but rather it's the hands of who it's in that it's dangerous?
Yes, I think that is fair. I don't think if we just moved it from the hands of one group to another, it would fix the problem.
Right.
It's really about, having a kind of fully formed concept of what we are trying to achieve as being humans in this world, as being related to all the other entities on the planet. What are we trying to do and be, And those are the big questions. And then what we do with our technologies would be kind of potentially a bit more cognizant of those relations and that kind of democratic awareness, inclusivity, pluralism, etc., values that I've already mentioned. I think in different hands, it could be very different. It doesn't have to be what it is right now. I mean, what we're seeing now, for example, with regards to generative AI, is the work of all artists being just stolen and horrendous, and tools being created that actually just replace creativity, like making music, writing art, and so on. Why are we taking away the very things that we're supposed to enjoy most as being humans and just making machines do it for commercial purposes? I mean, it's just a transfer of the power to create. And making that a commercial entity for the super rich. It just makes no sense. So that's a very flawed use of the development of AI. It makes no sense, frankly. But yeah.
Does it surprise you, like, how unaware people are of not only, like, any time, like I said to you, I asked the guys here in the studio if they knew what transhumanism was, and they were like, okay. Yeah. What is that? Does it surprise you that so many people still don't know what these things are and what is happening, what is to come in the future? Because I'm having conversations with people and they have no idea what any of this stuff is.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of surprising. I mean, when I first came across it, maybe 15 years ago at that museum I mentioned, it was to me, it was just like a real moment where I was just like, wow, this how is this not what we're thinking about? This is such a big deal. The fact that we might be on the cusp of creating these technologies, what does that mean? And initially, I'll be honest, I was quite excited at the prospect. I mean, if you gave me a pill and I get to live forever, I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, I'm in. This sounds fun. But it's really when you start to think through the full implications of it that you start to go, this is not quite as simple as I thought, and you realize some of the dangers and the implications of having such powerful tools in the hands of people. It's going to be a real challenge. But yeah, I am surprised. I mean, I think things are changing a little bit. When ChatGPT came out, that really, I think, made people a lot more kind of aware of AI and thinking through how quickly it might change society in various ways. I think what's really difficult is you've got an incredible amount of hype that comes from the industry as well.
Right.
So it's getting the right balance between awareness and then falling for hype. And again, that's just part of the kind of ecology we live in. It's like, and even the tools themselves, of course, people consume information through social media. These are tools that are trying to, keep them narrowly focused on staying on those things because that's what gets them profit, right? But also therefore it's driven by things like anger and hatred because these responses keep you there. So unfortunately it means that the kind of information that people are swallowing tends to be stuff that is not very wholesome, leads to kind of emotional states that make you maybe not think with compassion and kindness, but with fear and kind of resentment and so on. And so that fosters a kind of information ecology, I think, that is not conducive to really thinking through the complexity and nuance of all of this stuff, and unfortunately makes most of us kind of very reactive in our responses, So I think again that's part of it. The technologies themselves create the information ecology that unfortunately isn't necessarily the best way to be having these kind of conversations,
Do you think that transhumanism could actually help solve global challenges like disease, climate change, or we've already spoke about aging? That's something that could definitely happen, or do you think it could make them worse?
Well, I think maybe part of the problem is thinking about things in terms of solving things, because I think that's the wrong approach, because it implies that these problems are technical challenges.
Right.
And I don't think they are technical challenges. I think they're political, philosophical, and ethical contestations. They're not things that can be solved. They're ongoing contestations, so
right.
Solving these. So let's say we solved aging. We just managed to be like a rough-eye rockfish and no longer aged, right? Well, what would happen? I mean, right now we're destroying planet Earth with our lifeways, right?
Yeah.
So the lifeways of rich Westerners in particular require more than one planet per person in order to sustain those. And in fact the lifestyles of billionaires would require many planet Earths. Now, who do you think would be the ones that would get to live longer if we solved aging? It would be those billionaires. So on the one hand, you've solved aging, but what you've done is created a problem where you're allowing the very people that are destroying the planet at a massive rate to just carry on doing it for longer. So that isn't, that's when we think of things in terms of solving stuff. And I just think, transhumanism has this kind of fantasy that technology solves all problems. Technology doesn't solve all problems. It's philosophy, ethics, politics. That's where you resolve, not solve. That's where you contend with ongoing, complex, ecological unfolding of all the difficulties our progress, in inverted commas, makes, And unfortunately, there's just so much focus on increasing our ability to do things technically, and not enough on why we're doing them at the highest level of thinking through what are we here for, what's our purpose, or however you want to put it. So I think it's not about solving stuff. Of course, AI and other technologies will allow us to do more things, but those very things will create other challenges. And so for me, it's not about solutions. It's about thinking through our relationship with technology, with the environment, with other people, and making sure we're being kind of inclusive and in that regard and compassionate.
Yuval Harari said, and this is not verbatim, so don't come for me, people. Mm-hmm. But he said that human beings will essentially sort of in the next 5-10 years be useless. What do you agree with what are your thoughts on Yuval Harari and his thoughts on humanity?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't think we'll be useless. And I think, again, where does that even, the idea that we'd be useless come about? That literally is just a way of thinking from a capitalist lens. Usefulness means, in that context, productive, have a purpose in the economy, being able to produce value in the economy, right? So when he's saying we'll become useless, what he means is AI will take the jobs, and most humans won't have a productive thing to do in society, so they will become useless. But being human is experiencing the world. That itself is surely the greatest use. You know,
Right.
we have, and that goes for all the other animals and beings out there as well. You know, who knows if trees are conscious, if it's something it's like to be a tree, there might well be. But, you know, I think it's such a kind of limited conception of what usefulness is. So I think, is it possible that AI could start to automate away a lot of jobs? Yes. Again, I think we need to be cautious with this idea, because I think the AI companies attract huge amounts of investment by telling us they're about to, you know, create artificial general intelligence, and there will be agents solving everything, and AI is going to take over the world, and we're all going to be, you know, lose our jobs, etc. That's for them a way to attract investment. So we need to be a little bit skeptical of that story. But at the same time, yeah, we need to accept that AI is likely to have impacts on the job market, etc. I would like us to say, well, okay, the use of being human doesn't just come from being productive to the economy. It comes from our experience of being, the love we have for each other, our relations, our compassion for other beings and things, you know, our joy, our ability to find things funny, you know, all of these kind of relational elements is what gives us purpose and value. So we need to think, well, okay, if AI is replacing humans, what kind of societies can we build that ensure that we can continue to laugh and love and do all those things,
Right.
rather than being considered useless and surplus to requirements and basically marginalized by this kind of system, you know?
Right.
So that's how I'd frame an answer to that.
Gosh. In your research, did you come across any surprising cultural or spiritual, philosophical reactions to transhumanism?
Yeah, this is going to be a bit of a depressing one, I'm afraid.
Oh no! No
And I know
more
we're
depression. We're already.
yeah.
I don't think we can get any more depressed than this.
I know, it's quite bad. But like, so some transhumanists don't actually disagree with a lot of what I'm saying. They kind of understand that, yeah, actually, you know, if you put the logics of capitalism together with the logics of transhumanism, there are certain implications there. And there's one of them advocates for this idea called necronomics, which is an economics of death. It's how to make the most use of death making in society. And what this person advocates is saying, well, you know, if we cut social services, people will be forced to put themselves up for risky experimentation in order to survive. And that risky experimentation allows us to move forward with these transhumanist technologies, as we can experiment on people more freely. And therefore, we should think of necronomics and economics of death as a way to kind of maximize the utility at enabling us to go towards this transhumanist future. The same thinker talks about humanity 1.0, which is you and I, and humanity 2.0. And he argues that, well, humanity 2.0 is more valuable than humanity 1.0 in the same way that a human is more valuable than a chimp for him, or a dog. It's like a hierarchical way of thinking. And so humanity 1.0 is just a stepping stone. We don't need to think about rights or anything like that for those kind of people. We simply, you know, maximize the use of death making in society to help us move towards this transhumanist future. So that's the idea of necronomics, which is pretty bleak, but it takes the kind of same perspective as I do, but it advocates for it rather than saying, hold on, this is actually inbuilt into the logics of our systems. Wow. Another one was black sky thinking. So this is the idea that we shouldn't worry about environmental catastrophe and the pollution of Earth and so on. The sixth great species extinction, which is happening at the moment, our destruction of wildlife. Instead, we should embrace that, because by torching planet Earth and destroying it, it will force human ingenuity to become a multi-species organism, that we can start colonizing the stars and the universe and go to Mars and so on. It will force our ingenuity to push us outwards into the galaxy, and therefore we should embrace environmental catastrophe and collapse. So that's black sky thinking. I mean, there's other terrifying ideas: long-termism, effective accelerationism, neo-reaction, and these ideas are very much what are underpinning the kind of techno-elites of Silicon Valley. The new Trump-Musk alliance is built on a concept called neo-reaction and another kind of philosophy called long-termism. So these things are not just crazy ideas of marginalized crackpots. They are the ideas that animate the minds of the most powerful people on planet Earth right now.
What is neo? What was it?
Neo-reaction.
Neo-reaction.
So neo-reaction is a philosophy. It's a philosophy which basically, it's a bit of a complex one. A guy called Curtis Yarvin and another guy called Nick Land are the main proponents of this idea. And there's many elements to it, but it's basically the philosophy that underpins the political ideology of J.D. Vance, for example. And there's a guy in Silicon Valley called Peter Thiel, who, I don't know if you've heard of Peter Thiel, but he's one of the PayPal mafia. So along with Elon Musk and so on, one of these billionaires. He's a CEO of Palantir, which is a big surveillance.
I know Palantir.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So neo-reaction, basically, it's a kind of fascist ideology. It believes very much in intelligence hierarchies, including racially coded ones. It advocates for the idea of networked states. So we should basically have city-states that are ruled by CEO monarchs, kind of kings, and basically, unless you serve the purpose of the king, if the king deems you surplus to requirements, then they should have the right to turn you into biodiesel to run the city buses, for example. Or he says we could virtualize the masses, create virtual worlds just to put them in there if we were going to be kind to them instead of turning them into biodiesel.
So we're basically all fucked.
But like I say, these ideas, they're extremely powerful in Silicon Valley. Like Doge, which is Musk's government efficiency thing. Yeah. The concept exists in neo-reaction under an acronym called RAGE, which is retire all government employees. It's a manifestation of that. Trump's talk of freedom cities are just a modern manifestation of this network state kind of system that Yarvin and others have advocated for. So these aren't just like crazy fantasies. This is the world these people are building. This is the ideology upon which they're making their ideas. I mean, another one is long-termism.
Long-termism.
Yeah, long-termism.
What is that?
What is that? Okay, so there was a philosopher at the University of Oxford called Nick Bostrom, and he used to run an academic institute called the Future of Humanity Institute, which was funded by Elon Musk and others.
Yeah.
And there was another philosophy called effective altruism. And effective altruists were just asking, what's the best way to do good? They wanted to apply reason, rationality to doing good. And, so they looked at all the different charities and things you can invest in. And originally they said, well, do you know what the most good is? Bed nets, because mosquitoes are the biggest killers, and we should invest in bed nets to save people. The second iteration, they were like, well, if you think about suffering on planet Earth, it's the meat industrial complex. It's the killing of billions of animals and so on, and the keeping of them in terrible conditions and so on. So that would be the next thing to solve. And then what happened is Nick Bostrom kind of got involved a little bit with this and said, well, actually, if you think about it, we are about to be able to transfer consciousness over to computers, upload our minds, and potentially make post-digital consciousnesses. And he did some maths, and he decided that we could colonize the Virgo supercluster. And I think it's, is it 10 to the 26 or 10 to the 56? I can't remember the number. But basically, lots and lots of noughts, trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of post-digital consciousnesses he decided we could colonize the universe with. And what this means is, if you take this kind of utilitarian, calculative kind of approach to doing good, to ethics, it means that the cosmic endowment of being human is that we can create this immense amount of value in the universe by making all these post-digital consciousnesses and colonizing space and so on. And those trillions of post-digital consciousnesses vastly outweigh the value of the 8 billion people alive now on planet Earth. And so things like genocide, war, inequality, poverty, all what he calls mere ripples, they don't matter. The only thing that matters is the baton of our technological expertise is passed on so that we are enabled to make these post-digital consciousnesses and colonize the universe with these intelligences. And that is the only moral good. That is the only moral good. And that is the philosophy of long-termism, and Elon Musk tweeted one of Nick Bostrom's papers saying this is the most important academic paper ever written. He tweeted a book by William McCaskill called What We Owe the Future, which is like the book long-termist tract, effectively, saying a close match for my own philosophy. And this is, again, the ideology behind what Elon Musk is wanting to do. This is his justification for doing all these terrible things he's doing, because he thinks it doesn't matter what damage he causes. If people die through his social service cuts through with Doge or whatever, doesn't matter because they're irrelevant. The only thing that matters is his technological ability to wake the universe up with, you know, consciousnesses in the future, basically. So that's long-termism. So that's kind of what they're aiming to do. Yeah.
After all the work that you've done and all of the research that you've done on transhumanism, and you've written this incredible book, in the end you're going to tell us where to find your book, so we can link it on our YouTube page.
Yeah.
Are you personally excited or are you afraid? Because personally, I am shitting myself for the future and what's to come. For us who are considered humans, was it? This is the human 0.1, and then there's the human...
The 2.0,
2.0.
yeah.
I'm absolutely shitting myself. Are you excited, or what are your personal...
It's a strange one. Like, when I was writing the book and doing the PhD, you know, and I would kind of talk to people about this stuff, people would go, isn't this like, do you find this incredibly depressing? And I just didn't. I found it like... really interesting that we, you know, if you think about the 300,000 years human history's gone back, and we're on the precipice of like the end of this film in one way or another, right? These ideas, like, humans probably won't be around for much longer. We, you know, it might be in our lifetime that we see whether it is the utter devastation of the species, or whether it is like these guys are right and I'm wrong, and that we're all just going to become post-digital intelligences that colonize the universe to live forever, right? So I'm like, I didn't find it that depressing, even though I was like, this is really dangerous, some of these ideas. But to be honest, in the last year or so, with the kind of things I was suggesting in my book could happen, are happening much quicker than I thought they would.
Right.
And so I feel like my worst fears are just becoming reality in front of us. So the things I said, you know, in my book, like, are just becoming true now. and so that I think is a problem, and it makes me very cautious. But I do still allow myself this possibility to think maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these guys are right and I'm wrong. And I think it's important to, you know, have the humility to not just think I'm right all the time, right? So that's one thing. So, and I'm quite an upbeat, optimistic person. So I kind of think, well, let's hope for the best. The other thing is, it's really important not to let all of this stuff make you miserable and make you think, well, I can't do anything. It's the end of the world. We need hope, because without hope, you can't have the love and compassion you need to start to imagine alternative ways of structuring society that might be more beneficial to us all. And I would say for every bird and butterfly, every tree that you see out there is, you know, a reminder that Musk and Trump have not destroyed all of nature just yet. And likewise, every breath each of us takes is a reminder they haven't destroyed us just yet. And that means that there's still time to create a better future. So you know, in that sense, I'm hopeful, and I'm determined to hang on to hope. And there are different ways we could be. You know, of course, the technologies that they're developing makes it all the more difficult, because they have the media ecology, Twitter, and everything else to kind of influence the way people think, and stop us imagining the world anew. Unfortunately, so it's becoming ever more of a greater challenge, but I still think there's hope as long as we have the birds and the butterflies and the trees and our breaths. So I think we've got to keep on fighting. And at the end of my book, the last chapter, I create a kind of almost like a meta-ethical framework for starting to think through, well, what ethics could we enact that might enable us to have a more positive looking future. So the last chapter of my book is kind of dedicated to that.
Oh, you're so optimistic. Just in closing, what are your hopes for humanity and for transhumanism and everything that's happening? Sort of best case scenario in the next, 5 years.
Oh God! In the next 5 years,
Let's close on a positive note.
The best case scenario, if we're honest, is that I'm just completely wrong, and that AI becomes super intelligent, solves all our problems, and I'm wrong, and you can solve everything, and we all get to live forever and without destroying all the other amazing things on planet Earth. That's the best case scenario.
And the worst case scenario is?
The worst case scenario is that I'm right, and all this might end in a lot of genocide. And that's probably where I think we're going with Musk and Trump. But I think what we shouldn't do is be passive and think, well, it's one of those two things, and it's none of our business. I think realistically, we've got to engage with these ideas. We've got to engage with these technologies that do mean we might have a radically different world within our lifetimes. And I think we really need to think hard about understanding that being human is a social construction. It is something we create. Well, what kind of a human would we like to create? What kind of being do we want to be? Do we want to be something that egotistically wants to extend itself, colonize everything, destroy everything, consume everything, eat it all up like we have done for the last few hundred years on planet Earth, creating this era of the Anthropocene, dominated by human kind of greed, effectively? Or would we like to create a human which is compassionate, understands our connection to all of nature, that has more respect for nature, allows it to live, allows ourselves to flourish along with other things? And if that means that there are technologies along the way that help that process, but they're towards the idea of making a kind of inclusive, pluralistic, flourishing future for all, including the marginalized, then maybe that version of humanity would offer us a better future.
Beautifully said, Dr. Alex. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No worries.
And just before we go, where can we find your book?
Yeah, the book is called The Politics and Ethics of Transhumanism, Techno-Human Evolution in Advanced Capitalism. And it's free, it's open access, so anybody can download it. You can download it in all the usual places. Bristol University Press publish it, so if you Google that title and go to the Bristol University homepage, you can either buy a physical copy or you can download a PDF for free.
Amazing. Okay, till next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.